Welcome to the Amber Nectar podcast, discussing the things we think about Hull City AFC.
Go for it, right, okay. It's the Amber Nectar podcast. Welcome along. Good to see you, whether you're watching us live right now on Periscope or later on our YouTube page. And of course, if you prefer the audio-only version of the podcast, it is available to download on SoundCloud. As you can see for this, I was going to say special edition of the podcast. I think special is entirely the wrong word, but certainly an unusual edition of the podcast because it's not very often we get such a distinguished guest in as we have this evening. But Phil Buckingham is sitting to my right, the long-time football writer for the Hull Daily Mail, and it took a lot of negotiation to get him on, but finally he's agreed. He's agreed to give up his childminding duty just for one evening, and come and join us. So naturally, we're hoping we've got plenty for Phil to tell us and to look back on an extraordinary season, a heartbreaking season, a difficult season, and in many ways a predictable season as well, given what was going on at Hull City in the summer. But the thing is, Andy, after the Crystal Palace game, the one sort of set of personalities involved with City who we weren't going to throw rotten tomatoes at were the players. But after the game against Spurs yesterday, they get their share of rancid fruit, don't they, after what went on?
Yeah, I think they do, because although you clearly identify the ultimate culprit of the season being Ehab Allam, that doesn't excuse the players from the last couple of games. And the reaction to the Sunderland defeat was extraordinary in just how poor it was. We gave up at Crystal Palace and then managed to go 3 worse against Tottenham. And they're not ultimately to blame, but for goodness sake, a little bit of professionalism wouldn't hurt when people are paying to watch them.
Can I throw a mozzarella at Andrea Ranocchia?
Well, he's not had a great end to the season. I mean, you had issues with his arrival in the first place. Not necessarily fair ones, but you had issues with his arrival in the first place. But in the last 2 games, he's made that awful error in the opening seconds against Crystal Palace. And then in his closing statement yesterday said, go Hull Tigers. So he's seriously not going to be your favourite full stop, is he?
No, I might do the dishes with a match one shirt of his, maybe. No, I've got issues with Andrea Ranocchia, but that's more to do with his performances for Sampdoria last season. He's been fairly competent at times for City, but I'm not going to pick on the one player. City pretty much to a man just capitulated yesterday mentally. They just seemed to lose all mental belief and even professionalism, it felt really. It was quite soul skewering to watch.
You, of course, are impartial, and you have no emotional interest whatsoever, so we're told. But in all seriousness, it's hard to take when you're in a professional capacity watching a team go through some real difficulty and real heartache, and seeing people whose feelings are invested in the club sort of trampled all over as we would see it. How's it been within the press box environment over the last year?
I don't know where to start with that.
We'll kick off our shoes and sit back and just enjoy what you've got to say.
I just find it such a shame that this weekend is a year to the day since the playoff final last year, and obviously that wasn't the most celebrated promotion, was it, when you look back at it at Wembley? But it just feels like such an opportunity wasted, and the question is, like, how soon will it come again? I mean, you go back to the summer, and you deal with journalists around the country, and they were sort of open-mouthed at how badly City were approaching the season, and it almost became like a club of curiosity and ridicule in equal measure, really, where there were, people from the outside were looking at City and just mouths agape, really, that you could start a season with 13 senior professionals, and
not all of whom were fit.
Yeah, well, it's just, I think it's telling. I think Andy Robertson did it on Instagram, and I think it was David Myler did it last week, where they both reposted the picture from when they were over in Austria of the infamous team picture where there's 9 of them. So I get the impression, without putting words in the mouths, that the players probably look back and feel a little bit let down as well.
So when you look back at that, I mean, we can talk about the specifics of that photograph.
Lovely mountains.
Exactly, and actually very nice training kit, I'm sure you would agree as well. But you look at that photograph, and that's going to be such a symbol of the season, and the season hadn't even started.
Yeah, that's the abiding image of the season, won't it? That's the reality of it. When in 10 years you think back, people will still be talking about that team picture.
Do you think that who took the photo? I know Curtis Davies tweeted it. Who took the photo?
Ehab.
Not entirely sure, but it is slightly misleading, that picture, because I think Abel Hernandez was there and he wasn't on the team.
Oh, you're ruining it now.
He was having his cornrows done.
The team trip up the mountains.
He was having a diacritic put on his shirt.
I remember being away in Austria, and I think it was David Milo I spoke to, and even then I think he said it'll be some story if we stay up. You know, and you've got to think back and put that in context. The newly promoted club is already having to say that before a ball's been kicked, that it's going to be some story if they stay up. And
just one last thing on that picture. I mean, Curtis Davies tweeted it, and of course he tweeted it kind of with, you know, smileys and things on it as a bit of a joke. Oh, look at this situation that we're in, but we're fighting on and we're all smiling. But do you think at least part of the reason why he tweeted it was to try and get somebody in charge to buck their ideas up over recruitment?
Possibly, yeah, that's certainly one way of looking at it. I just got the distinct impression that the players did feel a little bit let down last summer. But to their credit, throughout pre-season I was expecting them to chuck it at some point and, you know, just get thumped in a friendly somewhere. But they were excellent in pre-season. I know that doesn't count for a lot, but it did help them in the build-up to the new season. You know, the first 2 wins, and it did in a funny way bring them together. But it was just a season built on wet sand, really. That it was unsustainable.
And although there's 1 or 2 personalities in that picture who've blotted their copybooks a little bit, you look at El Mohammadi's performances this season, for example. Generally, it's and a couple have gone. Livermore and Snodgrass have left the club, but served the club reasonably well, and certainly in Livermore's case with distinction prior to leaving the club. But it's kind of all about those players again. You know, we've come full circle. Pretty much those players again, because everyone else has either gone or was on loan and was never going to stick around anyway.
I reckon being flared by Torino fans in a friendly in Austria must be quite character building. That must have prepared him for the season psychologically.
And so when you look back at that now, Andy, because this is supposed to be a review of the season podcast, because let's face it, we don't really want to talk about the Tottenham game that much, although we will come on to it a bit more in a moment. When you look back at it now, do you actually find yourself surprised that City actually did stick it out for so long?
Yeah, because at the start of the season, people were seriously talking about us going one better than Derby's notorious points record.
Well, I seem to recall us all celebrating when we actually went past that points total.
Yeah, and it could be argued. I suppose there's not many people listening who are in a mood to hear such an argument, but having not finished bottom constitutes a considerable success in a way when you look at how the season started. Now, you get relegated whether you're 18th or 20th, the outcome is the same, but the fact that we did make a fist of it, and that also includes Mike Phelan, City were never cut off hopelessly adrift under him. We did win 3 games, got to a League Cup semi-final. The fact that we did that with the resources that had been made available, you can't call a season a success, but you can understand why it's happened and why it's panned out this way.
I vaguely resent being given hope now after, you know, expecting nothing but death in December. You know, to then have that opportunity of staying up and having the new Premier League numbers next season put in front of you, and then having it dashed. You know, I sort of feel a little bit numb in that. I almost think, well, we might as well have been relegated in November like we expected.
Well, I look back to that West Ham away game where the Post saved West Ham so many times, and I was utterly convinced that day that City would go down. But then, fast forward to the Watford home game, and I was utterly convinced they were going to stay up, because results like that and the nature of the game, that doesn't happen when you're about to get relegated. And
but that's
the hope, isn't it?
Those are the freakish results, or the more freakish results, that kind of dictate your longer term hope or longer term expectation. I mean, we absolutely ruled the roost at West Ham and lost 1-0 to a really, really badly awarded penalty, and then beat Watford 2-0 when we had 10 men thanks to a really badly awarded red card. For the most part, though, and obviously especially away from home, it was as we were expecting, wasn't it?
That's the single failing that you might have to level at Marco Silva, that he never did anything about the away form, because you just cannot simply hope to survive if you're only accumulating points in half of your games. You can't write half of your games off and say this is nothing to do with us. Now I can obviously understand that Burnley might provide the exception to that rule, but they were so very good at home, and we had only really trod water at home up until Silva's arrival. And it was just the away form that killed us. It was cheap 1-0 defeats. The West Ham one's a good one, whereby we're the better team for the whole game, and okay, if you can't win the game, don't lose it. And again, you can point to the penalty, but these things happen so often that it wasn't just ill fortune. West Brom away, we were winning, playing well, lost in the end, not even taking the game into extra time. And it killed us.
Watford away, another one as well, because they managed to win the game without actually having a shot on target. Of course, when you, Phil, talked to Marco Silva, did he offer any explanation as to why the team was so different on their travels compared to what it was like at home? And do football people seriously believe that the location of a football match is going to dictate whether you play well or not?
I think he always chose his words carefully around that, whereby he stressed that they prepared for the home and away games exactly the same. But every now and then he offered this sort of chink where he was questioning the players' mentality, and in a home game they're all used to the little comforts, but you take them away, and with stadiums against them, they tended to look vulnerable, and when spells in the game went against them, that was when they tripped up. And I'd point to like the Sunderland away game under Mike Phelan, and Middlesbrough as well, where
Middlesbrough was appalling, wasn't it?
I have some sympathy for Marco Silva when you look at his away games and the teams he faced away from home. There wasn't many gimmies in there, was there? And obviously they've crumbled at Palace, and perhaps Leicester, they walked into them at a bad time. But there wasn't too many away games where you thought, really should be winning this game. It was a tough run, wasn't it? And the flip side of that is he had a generous run of home games, let's be honest.
And yet the only points he got away from home were at Manchester United and at Southampton, and you wouldn't have had any odds at all on City getting anything from those games. It proves, I suppose, Les, just how unpredictable it is. It all is.
I suppose if you're relying on psychologically damaged players to get you somewhere, you're going to come unstuck in the end, because you had the contracted players who were psychologically damaged from having only 12 teammates earlier in the season, and even the majority of the players that come in, there were a bunch of misfits, really. Some of them excelled at times, some of them played really well at other times, and were anonymous at others. Ultimately, there were a bunch of players that weren't wanted by the parent clubs. Ranocchi is a bit of a laughingstock in Italy. Bizarrely, Everton fans despised Nias more than Gaddafi, and you had all these players that failed at the parent club, and they'd come to us to try and patch up some of their reputation, and to play a bit of first team football. So even those players, I think the psychology was always going to come to the fore at some point when it was really tested, and that's ultimately where we were found wanting. But even in games before that, like the Watford game, we played absolutely fantastically in the second half, but let's not pretend that the first half was bloody awful. It almost felt around that time that Marco Silva didn't speak to the players till half time, because there didn't appear to be anything. So even like a lot of the time, Silva was only getting like 45 minutes worth of performance out of City players. What I found slightly odd is when he first came, he had City playing really beautiful, fluid football. Like where we played at Old Trafford, and in those early games, like against Bournemouth, and you sort of expected that City would get better at that as the season went on, but oddly we didn't, and I found that a little curious.
Can I suggest that it might be because Huddleston didn't play in the latter stages of the season, and he was in the form of his career prior to that very unfortunate suspension, but then he nearly came back into the team, which continues to surprise me.
The absence of Huddleston for the Palace game and Evandro playing seemed to be possibly Marco Silva's bizarrest team selection of the season, and he's not made many, because let's face it, certainly at home, whatever he's done to the formation, whatever he's changed with the personnel, largely worked. But when we needed a big game player with an element of I know Evandro's an experienced footballer, but with an element of experience around an English Premier League relegation battle, and Huddleston's been through it with us before, then you would want a big game player like Huddleston in the side for what was the biggest game of the season. It was our biggest game by some distance.
I'd have had him in, and I've not always been a massive admirer of what he does, but
He's had a better season this season than he had in his last Premier League season.
I think he's had his best season for City. I think it's been better than when he first come because he's dictated games more successfully this season.
Do you think it's taken on an element of seniority because some senior players like Snodgrass, like Livermore, like Alex Bruce and a few others who of his generation have left?
It's possible. There's all sorts of things that could swirl around that contribute to that. He will be aware that there are many more years behind him than ahead of him in terms of being a top quality footballer, and he maybe wants to eke out what he can while he can.
I wonder if he was really surprised that nobody really came in for him when we got relegated. I wonder if that stung him and sort of maybe stung him into action over the next couple of seasons. Just that, that sort of like fading of the light, the need to sort of rage against it. But I would agree, I think it's been his finest season.
Do you have anything on that?
Well, there was a spell last year where he couldn't get in the team in the Championship. That's the fall from grace he had. In the 2 years from touted for an England call-up to find himself in the Championship and sitting on the bench. That was some fall from grace. But I found his lack of inclusion in the last few weeks mystifying, really, to the same point that I found the persistence with Alfred and Dye slightly mystifying, because I don't think he's done an awful lot in his loan time here, but I think he started every game, which you needed more from him. I think the reason him staying in the team was because he saw him and Klukas as a partnership where they were supremely mobile and all action, get around the pitch, where he looked at Huddleston and didn't see the same. But no, I agree with you all totally. When that Crystal Palace game, Huddleston should have been in the team for me.
Statistically, the one that stands out is the number of penalties we conceded. Now, I don't know whether you've actually looked at whether how much of those penalties actually genuinely affected the results of matches. I mean, but I'm assuming that all the ones that were scored, and we think about the ones that Jakupovic saved against Arsenal and against Southampton, but all the ones that were scored were key in the end, weren't they?
There was one away to Bournemouth, wasn't there? I don't think that was too key.
But in terms that we still lost matches.
Oh, right, okay.
So, what do you... What as Marco Silva, and indeed before him, Mike Phelan, do you think they had anything to say on why we were conceding so many penalties and whether they actually actively tried to do anything about it?
I don't think you could read too much into it. When you look back at some of them, there were just a couple of them were freaks, weren't they? Where players stopped it on the line with his hand. Rather than, unless you're just going to instruct your players not to handle it on the line, I don't think there's an awful lot more you can do. There were some silly fouls in there. I think back to Robertson against Man City on Boxing Day. Right in the game until that happens. They were just silly, really. And
is it fate, though? Do you think that City conceded all those penalties, or
no? No, in the same way the worst three teams in the league go down at the end of the season. The poorer players concede more penalties when they're up against the better players because they get tricked into these things, and I think that's probably the underlying reason why they concede so many penalties.
Maybe that was the immediate turnaround. Silva just said, "Stop giving away penalties." All right then.
Yeah, they weren't so bad in the last few weeks.
Apart from at Southampton, maybe that was the exception that maybe proves the rule. All right. We'll look back more on the season in a little while, but let's talk. I know. Well, even more joy for you then, Les, because we're going to talk a bit more about the game yesterday. Did any of you? I'm not expecting Phil to, because like I said, he's entirely neutral. But did anybody else here applaud Harry Kane off the pitch?
I didn't, but you know what? I'm not going to get bum hurt about it. I'm not a big fan of applauding opposition players, but he's a gifted player. I can't get annoyed about that. What annoyed me more was the fact that Tottenham fans were the ones singing songs about Michael Dawson, Ryan Mason and Tom Huddleston, and City fans just don't. That annoyed me far more than what City fans did applauding. The fact that we left the serenading of our players to Tottenham fans. I understand why the passion's gone amongst our fan base, but it is annoying. You'd think it's as if we're just as a fan base meekly accept our fate. And I'd like to see a bit of fire in the fans' belly and just singing some songs other than just to Marco Silva.
And yet, playing devil's advocate here, Andrew, if there's ever a time to watch arguably the best footballing team in the country put on a masterclass, albeit against a side whose heads have been long gone, and seeing a brilliant young English centre forward win the Golden Boot on your ground with a very, very well taken hat trick. It's when you've already been relegated and your own emotional sort of maelstrom has been sort of becalmed slightly after a week of getting used to it.
Andy didn't look becalmed on Saturday as the 7th goal went in. By that point, I was exhausted from rage, but Andy still had plenty of rage to go.
I'm a few years younger than you, Les, so my reservoir of rage is.
Imagine if we'd lost. Imagine
Rage
if
of wine.
But imagine if we'd lost 7-1 to Bournemouth on the last day at home, and Josh King had stuck away that hat trick. This is Tottenham Harry Kane. It's a different thing, isn't it?
We had a pretty good go at losing 7-1 to Bournemouth this season.
Not at home, but yeah.
Oh, yeah, not at home.
No, we were in Cactus Purple that day. No wonder we lost. Carry on. Pink.
I think Tottenham are the best team in the country to watch. I wish they'd won the league because Chelsea, quite frankly, can do without it. And I do like watching them play as a neutral when it's not City that they're absolutely taking to pieces. And what frustrates me is that I don't know what quality of performance Tottenham put in yesterday because their opposition was so abject. I have a feeling they would have beaten us comfortably even if we'd have been on top of our game, because my guess is that they weren't far off the top of theirs, but we don't really know.
But we didn't go into the game with hope. Now we were
course
talking.
not, no.
We went
Well,
2 weeks. Yeah, but 2 weeks ago, prior to the Crystal Palace game, we were talking about the hope of being able to go into the Tottenham game still in with a chance of staying up. Now imagine if we'd gone into that game with that kind of hope, and then they'd shoot us 7-1.
They wouldn't have showed us 7-1 if we'd needed something from the game. I think that's where the psychology of football that Les has touched on comes in. If we'd needed something from that game, I'm not saying we'd have got it, but we certainly wouldn't have lost 7-1.
And Josh Tymon made a couple of errors, and I think quite rightly for such a young lad, supporters and press, Phil, have been have gone a little bit easy on him, but he's not going to have a great memory of the occasion yesterday, is he?
No, and the same extent to Jared Bowen. That was his full Premier League debut yesterday. I understood the logic of playing those two, but it didn't look so clever after 15 minutes, did it? When I actually thought the first 10 minutes, I thought City are up for this, and they're having a bit of a go, but just the way they just meekly crumbled after 2 goals in 3 or 4 minutes, and Kane could have had a hat-trick soon after that, couldn't he? No, I don't think you can really excuse that last 20 minutes either. Dead rubber or not, I just don't. I think you almost owe it to yourselves as professionals not to roll over like that. And I'm not convinced Tottenham were close to top gear either. That's probably the thing that underlines the gulf most. That I didn't see Tottenham really going for it yesterday. They were able to stroke it around very easily in passages, weren't they?
And you dug the history books out, as you said you would on Twitter, and it is City's record home defeat in our wonderful, how many years is it now? My maths is rubbish. 113-year history. It's our record home defeat, certainly in a competitive game. I think there was one, I've just got one on Tiger Base here. We lost a game 8-0, but that was during the Second World War, and those don't go on a team or a player's record. But yes, a 7-1 home defeat is, I mean, even at the end of a season when your fate's already known, and in some cases the players know they're not going to be staying at the club anyway, are those players, as you know them, still going to be damaged by that? Not so much the Tymons and the Bowens, but the more senior players. Do you think they're still going to be damaged by that? Do you think that even at this stage of a really lousy season, they're going to have enough professional pride to think that was crap?
Yeah, and I think a couple of them have gone on social media and held their hands up. I think Huddleston called it a shambles, did he, or words to that effect. Kluka said it was embarrassing. I don't think anyone's hid away from the fact that's exactly what it was. But to me, it spoke of a team that knows its manager's probably going to leave. They've got no one to answer to, and that was the last chapter of the season, and they couldn't wait for it to be over, could they?
You think about, we were battling Swansea for so long, and the way they finished the season, they actually ended up 15th. I mean, they were way ahead of the bottom 3 in the end. It's Watford and Burnley who were nearest to us at the end of the season. I mean, Watford, you could say, have had a worse end to the season than we have, but of course they had the points accumulated.
Marcus Silva will sort that out next season.
I think he'd be crazy to go there. I'm fairly certain he's not going to stick around, but at the same time, I think he'd be crazy to go to Watford, who seem to have a one manager for one season policy.
I like the idea of him going to Inter Milan and taking Sam Clucas and David Milo with him. I think that would be brilliant.
All right, well, I might as well come to that. I was going to come to this later, but we might as well come to this now. Is he going to stay, do you think, Phil?
I'd be really surprised if he does. Just because of his ambitions. I don't think a man of his ambitions can be satisfied managing in the Championship.
Do you think Ehab wants him to stay?
Oh yeah.
And do you think Ehab has the resources and the tools to make him stay? Not is he a tool? Has he the tools to make him stay?
No, because I don't think so. Because it's a Championship club.
Is Silver purely going to make a decision on his own ambition then, rather than on resources, on wages, on length of contract, whatever else?
Yeah, I think it's been pretty telling. I think he's shown the club respect, and he's been very keen to do that. And he's you know, I think that's why he's delayed his decision till when he has. You know, he didn't want to just write it off before that game, or I think he's handled it pretty well. But he keeps mentioning the fact, you know, he's got to think about his career. And I thought it was a nice quote that he gave out yesterday, that, you know, if it was all about the connection between himself and the supporters, then he'd sign a contract tomorrow, or, you know, putting words in his mouth there, but it was something along those lines. And I think that showed that there's a genuine affection for the supporters here, but that's not enough. And he said that he can't let his heart make up his mind.
And one more question before I bring these two in. Do you think Marco Silva, judging by what you've just said, I hope I already know the answer to this question, but do you think Marco Silva fully immersed himself in Hull City, learned about the club, learned about the history, and so on? Was he one of those managers or one of those head coaches who just did a job with the players, or did he learn about the area and about the club?
He likes patties.
I know he goes out to eat on the marina, doesn't he? Because Michelle Richardson had a selfie with him on the marina last night out for a meal and put it on Twitter. But what do you think?
I can honestly say, and I think I know about as much about Marco Silva the day he joined as I do now. I think that's just the type of character he is, where he's incredibly professional. You know, he spends hours down the training ground poring over videos, and I don't think anyone can say he's gone through the motions here. You know, he's given it a real good go. But he's always had that barrier with the press. You know,
you never got a chance to sit down and do a colour piece.
No. I got a handshake off him yesterday, and that was about it, I think. But
have you washed your hand?
I just think that's the way he's approached it. I just think he's like the ultra professional, and he hasn't got any wish to play mind games or anything like that, or use the media to his benefit. He's just got on with the job and.
Blimey, the acceptable face of Portuguese management.
Yeah.
So, from a supporter's point of view, what on earth do City do next if, as we assume, in 48 hours' time after Marco Silva has his Wednesday meeting with Ehab Alam, he bids us farewell? What on earth do we do next?
I don't know.
And where do we go to do it?
I don't know. I don't see Ehab getting lucky again. I really don't. I don't know who advises him on football matters, but I just don't. The thought of Ehab picking the next manager scares me. And what scares me more is, when we got relegated in 14-15, we managed to sell a couple of players, and it was painful to see him go, Chester being one of them. But we made enough money so that we didn't need to have an absolute fire sale. But the key thing is, we had a manager who had the ear of the owner. And if Ehab says, well, I want to sell him and I want to sell him, Steve Bruce would ring his dad and say, no, actually, we want to keep those. If there's no manager after Wednesday, we're not going to make decisions based on a football basis if we sell players. So if somebody comes in for Clucas, we could just think, well, we'll just take the money. I think we could, for example, stand to lose Robertson and it not have such a deleterious impact. But I think if you lose Clucas in the middle, I think that's that much more. And I just worry that the decisions aren't going to be made from a footballing point of view, purely from how much money can we funnel into Alan Marine with you.
And on that note, of course, there are players whose reputations, despite this season, have been, if not significantly enhanced, then at least enhanced enough to make another club in the Premier League to think they're worth another shot. You know, they're not sort of toxified, if you like, by how awful City have been this season. Maguire being the obvious one, Clucas being another. You've got Robertson, who hasn't had the greatest season but has a lot of admirers. West Ham tried to get him a year ago, didn't they? Jakupovic possibly being another, and although you said it didn't happen last time when it could have done, there'll still be a bottom half of the Premier League club who might look at Tom Huddleston and say he could work in our midfield.
Perfectly possible. City have got around about 5 or 6 players who could plausibly play in the Premier League next season, and in the case of Maguire and Robertson, almost certainly will, and frankly deserve to. They shouldn't be scuffing around the likes of Burton Albion. That's for us next season to have to do. They're
Which we can't wait for.
No, I can't wait for it. It's a ground tick, isn't it? And in these
Yeah.
dark days, you've got to cling to something. So,
These dark days have been relegated from the Premier League. I did write something on Amber Nectar about relegations in the pre-Premier League days. Now, those were dark days, Andy, and you remember 1996 only too well.
The thing is, there's not getting relegated to the Championship is the least worst thing about this relegation. And me and Andy were talking that in the pub the other day, that if City were getting promoted to the Championship, we'd be gleefully excited when we look at the potential fixtures for next year. But it's not that we're going to be playing Nottingham Forest next season. It's the fact that there's such a pall of uncertainty over the club. What are the owners going to do next? Are they just going to asset strip the club? Are they going to continue with their punitive way of dealing with the fans? Is it just going to continue? And you don't see any end game when it comes to that, and that's the true loss of hope. Not whether we'll be playing Derby on the first day of the season. I don't mind that at all.
Somebody on Periscope, Andy's just said, and roll on Forest Green in the League Cup.
oh, now you're talking. And Wickham in the FA Cup.
Yeah, he still wants to go to Wickham. That statement last week that Ihab Alam released after relegation, Phil, he talked about being better at communicating with the supporters. I mean, we could put pretty much all of that in inverted commas if we were feeling particularly wicked. What's he like at communicating with the media, when he chooses to, at least? If you want to ask him questions and he grants you an audience, is he actually receptive, or is he sort of defensive and obtrusive?
Yeah, it's been an awfully long time since he gave the paper an audience. I think the last time he spoke to the paper directly was in the build-up to the membership schemes, that getting launched sort of 14, 15 months ago. So, yeah, I think that's the last communication, really, the club's had with him. I'd like to see him follow that through if he's promising to be more sharp in his communication with supporters, because it desperately needs it. That's someone asked me the other day about I've covered a few promotions for City now, and which was my favourite, and I'll always go back to 2007 and 8 because it just felt like such an open club, and that you knew the players, you were friends with a lot of the players. When they all walked up the steps, you were so chuffed for them because you knew how hard they worked to get there. When you looked at this team and this club at the minute, there was, all the 6 loan signings here, you knew they probably wouldn't be back if the club went down. And there's just like this, there's like a distance between the club and its supporters now, and it just all feels so unhealthy. And I struggle to see the club moving forward now until that comes back together, because it's almost like they succeeded through adversity last time, just through Steve Bruce's acumen in the Championship, really, and his ability to hold it all together. And that'd be my concern for this coming summer, is that the reason they went back up last time was credit to the owners as well, because they kept a lot of the relegated team together, the likes of Hernandez and people like that, and Huddleston, and found some money to go out and bring in people like Odebaggio. But Steve Bruce was the reason the club went back up, and just to challenge, I think that it's going to need a really astute appointment this summer.
And you say it's been quite a while since he had granted you an audience. How often do you actually ask, or how often does somebody at the Hull Daily Mail, even if it's not you, and if it's a news reporter or the sports editor, whoever it might be, how often do the paper as a whole ask for interviews?
I think we asked after the Crystal Palace game, and we've had nothing back. But it gets to a point where if you've always been told no, then you stop asking after a while. And
does that make them easier to criticise? Because they've got an opportunity with a reputable local newspaper to put their point of view across, and they don't.
Well, I always found it harder to criticise someone that is open. A perfect example, Steve Bruce, that he was that great with the media, and he'd take your calls all the time. That when there was a rot of a performance served up, that you found yourself going, oh, going to have to give him some stick here. but a lot of the time he teed it up for you. Like I think of away games at like Leeds and places like that last season, and you're thinking, oh, I'm going to have to stick the boot in it, and then he does it for you.
Did you ever want to say how dusty was that stick?
The old stock phrases, yeah.
Was he
miss them now, don't you?
Was he aware of that cliche? I mean, did you think it became a parody of himself when he said that? Because he did say it an awful lot.
I did wonder in pre-season when all these players kept referring to the big league, didn't they?
Yes,
it's all about being back in the big league. So it is. I'm sure it must be some sort of running gag in the dressing room.
Just keep going.
Just so you know, we've got.
Keep going.
Right. Okay. Fine. Okay. All right. Well, let's look ahead to the championship then. Because let's face it, whether like it or not, we are there. And I've had a look down at the fixtures. If Huddersfield lose the playoff final, then we will play 5 Yorkshire derbies next season. We've got the 2 North East clubs that have come down with us. There's 2 in the North West, being Bolton, who've been promoted, and Preston. We've got 1 trip to Wales, 1 trip to Bristol, 2 to East Anglia, 4 to London, and 6 to the Midlands, including that fabled ground ticket for literally every City fan. Because I don't think we've ever played Burton Albion competitively ever, have we? Even in the dim and distant when they had a different ground or anything else.
Played them friendly, haven't we?
Yeah, that was one of the first games I covered as a City reporter. I'm trying to think. It was certainly Peter Taylor's time because I remember speaking to him after the game. But yeah, you boys weren't at that game, no?
Did you go?
I didn't go. No, I can't remember why I didn't go. But I wouldn't count it as a ground ticket anyway.
No.
Okay.
Very,
I'm counting it.
very meticulous about these things. And I suppose it's because of the circumstances that we've entered the championship, and also because of the sort of squalid and toxic nature of the club that we've actually had for quite some time. We've had to go through for quite some time. That means that we are kind of underestimating just how much fun a championship campaign can be. I mean, we've got a pretty good record in it of late. Let's be honest. We've only ever been in since we first got back up to the championship under Peter Taylor over 10 years ago. We've only had 1 real relegation battle from the championship, and that was the one that Phil Parkinson started and Phil Brown rescued. We've always been sort of looking upwards in the championship, and I suppose it's 1 head coach appointment away from being able to do so again.
Yeah, I think if you're competitive, it's a fun league to be in. I think if you're not competitive, it just feels like one long slog, doesn't it? Because there's so many games. You just seem to be playing Tuesday, Saturday. But then again, because of the playoffs, you look at that first promotion season, 2007, 2008. We weren't really competitive for the first half of that season. We just sort of played well when Fraser Campbell joined, and that was enough to get us into the playoffs. So you can recover from a shocking start and still be competitive towards the end. There was those seasons under Nigel Pearson where we didn't always have the greatest starts, but we still had the opportunity to potentially get in the playoffs. So you would sort of expect City to be vaguely competitive next year, as long as we don't have 7 players rather than 13 this year.
Championship, they often say it's more entertaining and more difficult than the Premier League. I suppose it depends on what your ambitions are, of course.
Well, here's the funny thing. I don't really know what our ambitions are for next season. I don't think I could begin to guess what I would count as a good season. Now, I suppose winning the thing would be all right, but looking realistically, what is a good season next season? Because you've got to factor in who the owner is, who the new manager is, and who we've signed. So I really can't.
And who other teams have signed as well. You've got to factor in some of the serious candidates among the opposition as well, haven't you, Phil?
Oh, absolutely. That Aston Villa won't be that bad again under Steve Bruce. You can be sure of that. Norwich will probably be strong with a decent appointment. I don't look at the 3 relegated teams and think they're a shoo-in for the top 6.
I think Middlesbrough's the most likely, isn't it?
Yeah.
They're just one good coach. They've got the squad, I think, for the Championship. They're just one good coach appointment away, aren't they?
And I thought it was telling. Steve Gibson straight after they were relegated comes out on their local radio and vows to the quote was smash the Championship next year. That was an immediate statement of intent. That I think he's probably accepts his mistakes this season and wants to put them right next year.
I think Fulham's the other one I've got my eye on that might do well in the Championship next season as well, even though they lost their playoff semi-final. Do you think? I mean, maybe you know. At any point during the season before it was confirmed, do you think City were preparing for the Championship?
What, in the season just gone?
Yeah. Did looking at the Championship and preparing for a Championship season only begin after the final whistle at Selhurst Park?
It's a good question. But I don't think they'd appointed Marco Silva back in January with him. You know, they'd just stuck with Mike Phelan for the season if they were just going to willingly accept the Championship. But I think all clubs would suggest that planning for the next season begins sort of March, April time at the latest. So, you know, Steve Bruce always used to say a plan A and a plan B, depending on what league they were in.
You got two blueprints, haven't you? I mean,
yeah.
Paul Duffin did that with 2007-2008. Once they established that Phil Brown, that things were going well and maybe there was a promotion campaign, they put together two blueprints, one if we got promoted and one if we didn't. I suppose it's easier to put two plans together if you're looking at going upwards rather than possibly going downwards, though, isn't it?
And the flip side is that they knew who the manager was going to be regardless. That's the difficulty now, that, you know, when Steve Bruce left, he took all his, or the scouting network's been broken up, and, you know, Marco Silva's came in January and you know, from the outside looking in, it was a bit of a scattergun approach to recruitment. Most of it worked, don't get me wrong, but the question is now, who are City scouting for next year? You saw like a few names begin to surface that they were looking at certain people. You know, I think there's a defender in Turkey and stuff like that. It was all based on them staying in the Premier League, and you just wonder now. I mean, you can't begin the recruitment until the manager's appointed, and that's why it has to be quick. You know, if it's not going to be Marco Silva, then the appointment has to come in the next 3 or 4 weeks. Has to.
Okay. There's one more thing I want to ask you about the new head coach, and this will take us on to your memories of how long have you been reporting City? Is it about 12, 13 years, something like that?
About 11, I think.
11. What was your first season then?
I came halfway through the first Championship season, so
under Peter Taylor.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Phil Brown has been mentioned an awful lot. Is he equipped to take on this job again? And would anybody in this room welcome him back?
We were talking about this in pub, weren't we?
Oh, really?
Yesterday, lesson about how much you love a nice return.
I do. Not with absolutely everybody who's ever played or managed City.
You still have Wilbraham back, don't you?
He'll be a good coach one day, but no, I wouldn't have him back as a player.
Kitman, maybe.
Well, yeah, if he's my mate, Aaron Wilbraham, then you'd want him back as kitman because you'd get absolutely loads of stuff. So don't knock it.
Well,
Phil Brown.
Yeah.
Phil Brown.
Possibly. I mean, he's rehabilitated his reputation quite well with Southend. They've only just missed out on the playoffs in League One. And if you were to look at a manager who had done the same, who wasn't Phil Brown, he'd taken a fairly modest club to 2 points, I think, of finishing 6th in League One, you'd think, oh, that he might be worth a look. And if you appointed him, you could certainly see why it had been done. Now, of course, Phil Brown brings an awful lot of baggage. But
does he bring
brown baggage?
Does he bring that?
Baggage.
But does he bring the baggage anymore? Given that, firstly, he seems to have calmed down as a character a lot since his days at City. Secondly, we're not a Premier League club anymore, so there won't be half the interest on a national level in him. And thirdly, there's no Russell Bartlett or Paul Duffin.
That's the key one, I think. There's no Paul Duffin. That was where our conversation went to, wasn't it? Would he be chastened by what happened because of the years that have passed? Will he look back on it and regret the pink sweater and regret, you know, the club going to Chester races when they could have been having extra training when the senior pros wanted that? You know, would he be better if he didn't have a chairman who didn't want to be his best mate? And he wants to be Ehab's best mate, quite frankly.
Well, he has criticised the Allams a little bit. I mean, presumably that's the big sticking point. Even if his credentials as a coach and as a manager stack up, Phil, it'll be what's his relationship like, if there is one already, with the Allams, given that when it comes to Hull City, a lot of people will still want Phil Brown's opinion on things.
I think it's easy to forget how good a coach Phil Brown is, because people judge him on almost this caricature that he became at times at City, and then even at Preston a little bit. But I think you're right. I think it's almost like he's been stripped back to the. I remember Adam Pearson once saying that he really liked Phil Brown at the start because he was the tracksuit manager, and then he morphed into this Hugo Boss suit man on the sideline, and
who wore different colour schemes depending on which competition City were playing in.
And that didn't make him a bad manager, but it almost like shifted the focus away from his talents. And I think he remains a talented manager, and you only have to look at the job he's done at Southend. You don't You don't take a club out of League Two and then just miss out on playoffs in a very competitive League One without having something about you.
Is there any prospect, do you think? If Marco Silva goes on Wednesday, which we all expect him to do you think Phil Brown's name will come up at all?
Well, I'm sure it'll come up amongst supporters, and they'll be having the same debate we're having now. I can honestly say, as things stand, I haven't got the first clue which direction a managerial search would take post Marco Silva.
All right, one more question on it then. Just one more on it then, because obviously maybe it's a bit of a red herring. But you know Phil Brown well. Do you think he would come back if he was asked? Do you think he would leave Southend and come back to us if he was asked?
I think so, yeah. Because it's a step up. Like who wouldn't take the step up from a modest League One club to go back to the club where he's enjoyed his great success? I mean, it would seem like a no-brainer.
And another homecoming. I know you think I like people coming back, but one that Les certainly wouldn't have back, but will come up because he comes up for every managerial vacancy at the moment, including the one that's been created at Sunderland today, is Nigel Pearson. And this is a man who definitely does have record for sorting out a really sort of rotten to the core Hull City after relegation from the Premier League.
I imagine that the issue of the present owner would make it impossible for him to return. However, I would have Nigel Pearson back.
You wouldn't, would you?
I don't know where you've got that from. I've actually got a lot of time for Nigel Pearson. I know he's an irascible bastard, but I almost wonder if that's just a public persona, because I've never got the impression that's what his players think, and I've always got the feeling that his players love him, and he puts that on, to sort of shield them, protect them. I don't know, maybe he just did it for the lols. I don't know. But I loved the job he did when he was at City. I loved the fact that he took a section of the team and put it right when he was here. He was like, right, we've got Zayati and Gardner in defence, so we brought in like James Chester and Jacobs and a number of other players, and then he moved on to the midfield, and then he moved later on, people were moaning we weren't scoring, he moved on to the strikers. I like that methodical approach to putting it right. So I'm actually a fan of Pearson. I don't really, I know because he's so irascible, I don't know what he got out of antagonising us, or maybe he wanted to antagonise the owners, I don't know, but he went a little bit bitter, and he didn't need to. There was no need to burn the bridges, otherwise, I think, because that turned a lot of people against him. But I've got a lot of time for Nigel Pearson, and when we're dropping out the Premier League and we're going to be losing players left, right and centre, I would say, yeah.
Which is what happened in 2010.
Yeah, I think it's easy to underestimate what a great job he did in that first season, because the club was a real mess, and from sort of the dog days of Russell Bartlett to the Allen family coming in, was it sort of December, was it? That was a club about to implode, I think, and he kept it all together. And don't get me wrong, he got back in that January, getting Matty Fryatt in and Aaron McLean, James Chester, and that turned the season around. But I thought he did a really good job, and I agree with Les. I do think it's a bit of a mask he puts on in front of the public, because you only have to speak to his players. They'd walk over broken glass for him, some of them.
He wasn't renowned for enjoying media.
No,
was he, Phil? Which doesn't make your job easy sometimes, does it?
No, but having dealt with Marco Silva, who flat bats everything, I don't know. Nigel Pearson might be a treat to have back. Whenever you see Nigel Pearson, he comes over and shakes your hand and asks you how you are. I must admit, I had difficulties with him when the time he was here, but I think any journalist that deals with Nigel Pearson regularly will have.
I'm sure Mike White's desperate for him to return. Anyway, what else do you want back, Matt? Maybe Terry Dolan, Ambrose Langley looking exuberant his corpse. Managers in Strawberry.
Well, Ken Houghton was at the game yesterday, but
Terry Dolan was as well.
Terry Dolan's a referee's assessor, though, isn't he? He won't be there for any love for Hull City, I wouldn't have thought. All right, let's talk about your career with City at the Hull Daily Mail then, because you say you started midway through that 05-06 season with Peter Taylor in charge. What's your background prior to that?
How far do you want to go back?
Well, I mean,
I led a bit of a nomadic existence in my youth. All my family are from the northeast, Sunderland season ticket holders, and that bug was passed down to me, sadly. But did university and had a year backpacking, and then went to journalism college, and then at the end of that there was a job came up on the Hull Daily Mail sports desk. Used to be the sort of T-boy really on the sports desk, and I got the job, and then doors opened. I think I did like 6 months covering Hull Rovers, and I didn't know an awful lot about rugby league, if I'm perfectly honest. I can say that
Nor
now.
do most rugby league fans, so shouldn't worry about that.
And then I started when they went up, they were ramping up the coverage going into the championship, so I became sort of John Fieldhouse's bag man. The second.
That was an enormous bag.
What was the bag full of?
Sandwiches. Go on.
And then John left, and like another door opened, and thankfully the editor saw fit to give me a chance at it, and forever grateful for that. And I do count myself lucky that I've had the best years of covering City and the FA Cup finals and European football. Although I'm forever gutted that I missed the locker room game because I got married on the first day of that season and went away on honeymoon.
What sort of idiot would miss the locker room game?
And I remember being
Unless Cook get time off work. I'm afraid his reason was a little less impressive than yours.
I'll never find that manager's coat.
And I remember being devastated that the European trips ended that soon. But yeah, no, I've had some great years covering City. Brilliant.
Mm. And what about the managers that you've dealt with? You started with Peter Taylor. Obviously, you only got half a year of Peter Taylor before he left anyway.
But very, very good to deal with, and he still takes your calls now. And this is back in the day where if you had an empty back page on a Monday or a Tuesday, say, you could pick up the phone to him. You might not answer, but you'd leave a message, he'd ring you back and tell you exactly what you needed, and great to deal with.
And I mean, I've interviewed Peter Taylor before, and I found that exactly the same. And I think, I don't know how often you speak to him in these days, when obviously an awful lot of hindsight. We've talked about Phil Brown with a lot of hindsight, obviously, but I always get the impression that Peter Taylor regretted leaving.
Yeah, I think he does now. When you speak to him, he has got a genuine affinity for the place. I know people probably looked at him and thought he was this sort of aloof southerner, what does he really care about City? But the bottom line is, I think he left with a real affinity for the club,
and he was non-stop successful as well.
Yeah,
he didn't even have a down period.
Yeah.
Two, in his 3 full seasons, 2 promotions, and a pretty much an impressive consolidation in the Championship. And he although his relationship with the supporters was soured slightly by the manner even of his departure, his stats back up, don't they?
Yeah, I don't think you could knock him looking back either for joining Crystal
Oh,
Palace.
you don't know some of the people we know.
All right. Well, I just think that was a club in his heart, wasn't it? And you could forgive him for that. And you look back at his career, and City was the last time he had it really good, wasn't it? When you think about it, so I'm sure he looks back on it with a lot of fondness. Well, I know he does.
And just before these two ask you anything they want to know, I want to know about the great enigma of City management, which is Phil Parkinson.
Yeah. Again, he's a very approachable guy. I just found him. It just came too early in his career. He'd had a good few years at Colchester, but it was when you looked at the club that Colchester was then, and the club that he was joining in City.
Even though we were in the same division.
Yeah, because you only had to visit Layer Road, and there was no expectations. They were at the peak of their powers, weren't they, getting into the Championship? Whereas City were plotting higher than that even then, and obviously he didn't do a very good job at all. But I think when you look back at the players he signed, it's almost like he started the promotion year the following year. Bringing in Ricketts, Turner, even Dean Marney played a big part in that season. He brought in some key players, and
that's his saving grace, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But I think he's proved since he's left City that he's a decent manager. He's had success with Bolton this year, and good luck to him, because he's a good manager. I just think there was too much pressure on him. He got off to a bad start, and he probably made the people he had around him upset the senior players, and then once you haven't got the senior players on your side, you're probably doomed to fail.
There was all sorts of rumours about that at the time, and it's fascinating you touched upon it, because I've never heard any particular corroboration of it, that his methods, whatever they were, I don't know if the ice bath thing is true, but there was always all the rumours that he lost the senior players quite early, or they set against him, and whoever's fault it was.
Yeah, he had a fitness coach whose name slips my mind, and he left, I think, after about the October, and I think Phil Parkinson didn't leave until about late November.
Is it Frank?
No, Frank Barlow.
Barlow.
Frank Barlow was assistant, who was a good guy, sort of the older head alongside him. But the ice baths, they used to have these, the big industrial bins where they'd wheel them along and fill them with ice, and then the players were told to get in them after training. And at the time, it was just...
Yeah, players wouldn't question that now, would they?
No, they wouldn't. No.
Who's going to tell Ian Ashby to get into an ice bath?
Yeah, it always looked a bit comical because there were, I don't know if you've been to the training ground where it's like the pavilion, and they were right at the front there, and these Sulu bins, just the big red things that the players were just clambering in and out of. It all just seemed a bit amateur, really. But as you say, ice baths are everyone's at it now, aren't they?
The thing I remember about Phil Parkinson that seemed to cut him off from other people was the way he just wouldn't play Nicky Barmby. Because if you remember, Stuart Elliott got frozen out, but he had the acid reflux problem, didn't he? And he was told to go and get himself well again. And I remember there was one famous occasion where we were playing a home game and Stuart Elliott was spotted pushing one of his kids on a swing in a playground near the stadium. He wasn't even watching the match. But Barmby was, Parkinson just wouldn't pick him, would he? And yet when Phil Brown took over, the first thing he did was restore Barmby to the team. And I remember Phil Brown coming to KCFM for an interview only about 2 or 3 weeks after he took the job, and saying, the first thing he did was criticise the man who had been his boss, saying, I couldn't believe it. We used to tell him to play Nicky Barmby every week, and he just wouldn't do it.
I guess that was part of his inexperience, that inability to handle a player like Nick Barmby, ex-Everton and Liverpool, England international of, was it 23 caps, and I think he found that probably difficult. You looked at his background then, who he dealt with at Colchester. Just a bunch of hungry lower league pros, and I think he probably found it difficult to probably tell Nick Barmby what to do. He might have felt fear. I don't know. You'd have to ask him, but you spot on, because Phil Brown saw that, and he was one of the big reasons that Phil Brown got the job, or at least until the end of the season, that caretaker spell around Christmas. And Nick Barmby scoring some key goals, I think, away at Sheffield Wednesday, was a win there. Yeah. That was faith immediately justified.
What I find interesting is in sort of like the modern Premier League era, where there's so much let's turn to foreign players. Does that make your life harder as a journalist communicating?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I don't know if you know how it works, but in the Premier League you have to have a mix zone. Every ground has to have a mix zone where journalists stand and get ignored by most players. But
they all pretend to be on the phone.
Yeah, that does happen an awful lot. I actually have it a lot better than a lot of clubs, because the big hitters of Manchester United will just flop through, and they don't even pause to give you a moment's thought. Whereas, especially this season, you would look at the starting 11, you think, right, well, Ranocki doesn't speak English, so I can't do him. Markovic, the same. And so you found yourself speaking to the same players. So if you saw Harry Maguire or Sam Klukas getting interviewed an awful lot this season, that's the reason why, because the pool of players that you had to speak to was diminished.
Could you not have brought Ranocki some pasta, since he claims you can't get it in Hull?
Yeah.
Has he not heard of Uno's on Prince's House?
It's not been to, what is it, operettas? Is that still going?
That was a typical interview given in Italian.
I'm slightly surprised you didn't have a photo of him when he joined holding a pizza towards his mouth.
We would have done 20 years ago.
And what about Barmby himself when he became manager? I mean, I think we've all met Nicky Barmby, and we've seen or heard him interviewed, and he's very guarded and private, isn't he? And did you find that it was? Did he notably try and come out of his shell when he knew that part of his new job was that he's going to have to deal with the media a lot more often than he'd previously done, and he was going to have to start talking?
Well, he was never shy giving interviews when he was a player, or certainly not in my time. Perhaps to national journalists that he didn't know, he was quite guarded in that sense. But I always had an awful lot of time for Nick there, where he really passionate about the club and wanting it to do well. It's just such a shame the way it ended.
Could you believe it?
No, not really, and because I wish he hadn't took the job now. When you look back, because he would probably still be involved with City's academy in some capacity, and I just think what a role model for young players to have. A whole lad done everything in the game. Imagine having him like a Steven Gerrard at Liverpool now in charge of under-18s. That'd just be phenomenal, wouldn't it? I just think it's a waste. His talents have been wasted, and I hope he's having a happy life away from football. But I just think football, certainly in East Yorkshire, is worse for not having him in it.
And just one last thing on Nicky Barmby. Do you think? I mean, we never got to see that much of what he could really do as a coach or as a manager. Do you think if he'd had slightly more understanding owners who were perhaps less worried about what people thought of him, that he actually would have made a good fist of it? Do you think there is a coach and a manager still in Nicky Barmby somewhere?
I'd like to think so. My worry is that the experience he's had just burnt him with football now. I mean, how long is it since he left? Is it maybe 5 years?
2012, wasn't it? The end of 2012.
So 5 years he's been out of football now, which suggests he doesn't want to get back in. I think he's coaching at White College now, isn't he? Like just in his spare time, because was it Kelvin he went to as a kid?
Yeah.
So he's that's a measure of the man that he still wants to put it back into his community. We'll never know, will we, what a good manager he would have made, but
presumably he's investing a lot of his footballing time in his son as well.
Yeah. Well, two sons, they've both had a go at the game, haven't they? And is it Jack in America, in the MLS at the minute? Yeah. So again, it will forever irk me a little bit that Nick Barmby has gone down as this what if.
Indeed. Well, thanks for coming in. We really appreciate it, and I'm glad that we've been able to smile a little bit over the last hour or so. And this is the point where we come to an end. If you're watching us on YouTube, I say come to an end, not just for this podcast, but for this season. If you're watching us on YouTube, thank you very much. We only started doing this on YouTube sort of mid-season, didn't we? And it seems to have worked. So all being well, the three of us, and maybe Phil will join us again at some point. We'll be back podcasting in August for the start of an exciting, intriguing, and God knows what else championship season for 2017-2018, which of course is also the 10th anniversary of City getting promoted. The 10th anniversary season of City getting promoted from the Championship for the first time.
I don't like that been 10 years ago.
It's bizarre, isn't it?
It's not good.
And so much has happened. Imagine we got promoted in 2008, and we've been relegated from the Premier League 3 times since then.
That's quite typical City, actually. I actually quite like that now you've spelled it off like that.
Anyway, thanks very much, and we'll see you in August.